Well, Donald Trump now has three indictments now following him. And this one in particular is, of course, in relation to his actions that he took in and around January 6th, which, of course, we all very much remember. The storming of the US Capitol that I think really sent genuine shockwaves around the world. It really did. And it had a lot of consequences, even uh, in Canada and the UK, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But one thing I really, really want to get across to people is Trump going to prison, or at least facing these charges and having his day in court. And ultimately, like I say, there are going to be four because there's the one of his Georgia telephone call, which, if you've heard that, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Have you ever seen a mafia movie? You've got Donald Trump talking, I think, to at the time, I think it was like the Secretary of State for Georgia, um, or at least sort of that position. He's like, "You don't understand. They're moving." I can't even do a Donald Trump impression, so I don't even. I'm gonna even try. You don't understand. They're moving. Dominion are moving voting machines out. They're trying to rig, trying to fix the election. You don't understand. That's a terrible. That's a terrible Donald Trump impression, but he was generally doing that. He was saying to this guy, look, you need to find me about 7,426 votes or something like that, which would be the exact amount of votes he would need to win that state. And there was this whole plot about the fake electors, um, subverting the actual democratically voted for elections of the people who voted. That's why part of that indictment is about sort of the breaking, I think, of civil liberties. I think that's how it's phrased, I believe, in the indictment. I might be wrong. But this is really, really important. And it's also easy to forget, going all the way back to 2015 and even 2016, how Trump was acting. Because you can go back and you can see him, even in the Republican primaries, saying that if he lost that particular primary, well, it was rigged against him. Even when he won, or even in states where he didn't do so good, he was like, "Oh no, that's fake. That's a loss. You know, they're rigging it against me." So he was so this pattern of Trump undermining democracy didn't just happen when he was running for president. It happened, and he was accusing the Republican Party of fixing the race, trying to stop him becoming president. That was back in 2015. And then, of course, in 2016, when he was running against Hillary, he was openly saying, if I lose, it's rigged, it's fixed. And then, of course, on into up against Joe Biden in 2020. You know, oh, if I lose, it's rigged, it's fixed. Now, most of this, of course, is down to Donald Trump's personality. He's a big narcissist. He cannot take being a loser, which is really what he is. He has constantly, from what you've seen of many psychologists, said that he's had this mentality drilled into him that if he isn't a winner, then he isn't, his self-worth isn't, well, worth anything. And that's very much something that seems to be of, well, again, not a child psychologist, but that's what most people in the sort of the psychology world, when they've sort of looked unprofessionally, very much so, at Trump. But those those words do have consequences. They have big consequences. So look at what happened after 2020, because there were two very, very big events that also happened, as I mentioned, in Canada and in the UK, where after January the 6th, I said it sent shockwaves, that it had repercussions, that people genuinely thought that other populists might try it. Because remember, Donald Trump has been seen as a pattern to replicate and duplicate by other right-wing populists running all over the world. So this is why it is important that the consequences for his actions are carried through. Otherwise, as we said, other people will do it. Other people will do it, and they will try it in other various ways to get away with it, which is what is probably the worrying part. That if Trump is seen to have succeeded in some way, well, then someone else will try it, and then they might succeed. And the worrying thing, as we've said before about this, is they only really need to succeed once. Once they're in power, they've sort of got away with it. And that's what a lot of people are seeing with this case at the moment, where there is this push by the prosecution to have this trial done as quickly as possible. Because if it is left any later, Trump might be president. Now, I don't think he will be. I think he will lose in the general election. I think, he's more than likely to win the Republican nomination. But I think when it comes into a general, I don't think these indictments are going to be playing very well, shall we say, against against Trump. And I think how US electoral politics plays out, I think a lot of people are going to be very, very turned off by Trump. But I think it will come down to the independents and even Republicans feeling that they can't generally vote for Trump. So we'll see what happens in that regard. But of course, back to sort of those repercussions of what happened on after January the 6th. So over in the UK, we had our own sort of mini Trump called Boris Johnson. And when Boris was in the midst of being turfed out of Downing Street, there was a genuine worry. There was a serious, genuine worry that his supporters might try something similar, that they might try storming Parliament. We forget that because this was, at the time, somewhat downplayed. But you can go back and you can see this being reported in the news. Would Boris's supporters try storming Parliament? That was a genuine concern at the time. That was a serious, genuine concern that a lot of people had, that would that be replicated in order to try and, well, keep Boris in power? And not only that, look at the Canadian truckers strike, where they, well, I say strike. It wasn't really for workers' rights or anything like that. It was very, very much an anti-vax protest, which the hard right sort of really glommed onto. There was serious worries that there was going to be a very similar attempt happen. That some group of truckers were going to ram their big 16-wheeler through the uh, gates of Parliament in Canada and try and storm the building. So January the 6th, and of course, this, all that stuff that was, you know, as I'm sure we'll find out, the consequences of what Donald Trump was saying about, the election being rigged and all that stuff. And, it ultimately led to, well, January the 6th. There are other democracies that are like, whoa, well, this could happen in America. It could happen here. And you saw that in the aftermath of, certainly in the UK, as I mentioned, in the actions of, would Boris Johnson supporters, try something similar, and again in Canada. So I generally say this now, but the likelihood of him going to prison potentially gets a lot higher, because the fact that he's got these 4 indictments against him, it just increases the chances every single time. And especially the Georgia one. I don't know how you'll get out of that Georgia one, especially when you've got that full hour phone call conversation, which again, you can listen to the full hour one. It's available online, but it's wild. But I generally say this with all seriousness. Him going to prison will be not just good for democracy in America, but it will be good around the world, because it will signal to all these people who thought, Trump is the guy to emulate. We want to sort of follow his populist rhetoric and follow his actions. It will send a very clear signal that once you lose power, you are going to be punished, because you very clearly broke the rules. You have done a lot of very, well, you've been a very naughty boy, and you're going to be punished for it. So it will be good for not just democracy in the US, but around the world. You've got, as we talked about recently, the Nigeria coup that happened. That is almost very similar, but somewhat different about particularly when it comes to power sharing between sort of civilian and military organizations. You've got things like in Myanmar, um, very similar, where the military did not like the fact that this democratic elected leader um, was doing things that they didn't like. Now, ultimately, of course, those two sort of are very different, similar situations, but ultimately this will be good for democracy around the world, and it will certainly make, shall we say, the Trump clones and the populists around the world think twice about, shall we say, really emulating Donald Trump. And ultimately that will be good for democracy around the world, and I really do genuinely believe that. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.